Talking church. I almost said family church. Accurate. All right. But anyway, welcome. Today, I'm Celeste. I'm the youth pastor here. And today I'm going to be talking about faith in worship. The last couple weeks, we've been on a series about faith, and we wanted to continue that a little bit this week and talk about just where it stands in worship. And I love worship. I am a worship kid. I'm a worship pastor's kid. I've been in and around it my entire life. I am on the worship team still. It's something that I have immersed myself in. And with us today, we have Matt Lockwood and Pastor Stu, both who are very much into worship, with Matt being the worship leader now. Pastor Stu was a worship leader as well and still very much loves worship. And we'll be talking to them a bit more later. But I wanted to kind of go into what praise and worship is in general, because I think it's very easily kind of just pushed aside to being the songs and dance part of the service. And as much as that is very important, praise actually has 7 definitions. There's 7 different words that's used for the word praise in the Bible. I'm not going to say all of them because I like giving homework, because again, I'm a youth pastor. But when I was looking at them, though, I realized that only 2 of them actually have a direct link to music, which I found interesting. And a lot of them are just a raising of hands and bowing yourself down and making a loud noise. Everything. There's so many different things, and then there are playing the strings of an instrument. There's so many different meanings to the word praise. And when you look at worship, the meaning of that is like to kiss the hand or to humble oneself, to bow yourself in reverence. And just looking at what praise and worship is, it's a full honor. It's a privilege. It's something that we are able to do. It's something that we get to come into the throne room of God. It says that I can't remember what verse it was. I meant to look it up and forgot. But it says that we enter the throne room with praise and thanksgiving. And just the fact that with our praise, with our shouts of praise, we get to enter into the throne room of God straight away and make ourselves known to Him is such an amazing privilege and a joy that I can't even go into the full extent of what that means. It's such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful privilege and honor that we have that I think we so easily put to the side as just something that we do on a Sunday morning. And it can't just be that. Praise and worship has to be a lifestyle. It has to be done in the personal as well as the congregational. It has to be done privately and publicly, or else it's just a thing we do. And nothing about our Christian walk, nothing about our walk of faith can just be a thing we do. It has to be intentional. It has to be done with a heart that is a heart that is fully convinced, a heart that is fully in love, or else it is just something. And I was looking at what worship and faith, how they go hand in hand. And honestly, faith, if you're doing worship without faith behind it, it's useless. I was thinking about when I was younger, when I was 13 and never had my heart broken at all, I would listen to songs about heartbreak and cry and be so into the song when I could not relate at all. You see all these different, I was in a play as well when I was younger, and I had to be really dramatic and sad about something that had never happened to me and live this and convince you that I'm in love and I'm in all this stuff, but it's something that I never experienced. And I think a lot that sometimes we kind of treat worship like that, where we treat it as something that we have to be convincing of as opposed to living. Because a lot of what faith, we've been talking about for faith, is proclamation and speaking out to what we want to be seeing, or it's sometimes something that you are actually living. And I was looking at just some classic worship songs that we do in the congregation. 10,000 Reasons is timeless classic, and it's saying bless the Lord, oh my soul, worship His holy name. And if you don't listen to the words you're speaking, it just becomes a song, but you're literally commanding your soul to bless the Lord. It's not just a monologue that you're just it's not a sing-along, but you're commanding your soul to bless the Lord. You're commanding yourself to get involved in You're putting yourself in the throne room of God, and therefore you are commanding yourself to enter into the activities of the throne room. And another song, I just pulled out 2 because I just chose some of my favorites. But It Is Well, where you sing a lot. it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. And that's like another really easy proclamation where you look at what is going on in your life and you're not saying like, I'm ignoring what's happening. I'm gonna just pretend like it's not there, and I'm not gonna be that 13-year-old that is gonna say something that I don't feel. I'm going to proclaim to the mountain in front of me that it will be well. It is going to be well, and no matter what I see, it's well. And yeah, so that's like, I wanted to kind of say it, like corporate worship, where we do focus on music, it is so important to listen to the words you're saying, because it does become a sing-along. It does become empty, and I don't want to come to God with anything that's empty. I don't, like, unless I'm saying, God, fill me up, I'm empty, but I don't want the things that I'm presenting to him as an offering to be empty and useless. So when I'm coming with, like, when you come with your praise and with your worship, whether it's a proclamation or a commandment to yourself or just declaring who God is, if there's not faith behind it, it's useless, in my opinion. Like, when we're proclaiming who God is, if there's not faith, if you don't believe him to be all those things that you say you are, that he, all the things that you're saying that he is, then what are you saying? What are you saying? And I talked about it a couple weeks ago, just in Hebrews 11. It says that Sarah, when she was given this promise, she considered him faithful who had promised. And in these songs and in our praise and in our worship, if we're doing it because we have to, then just don't do it till you can, until you can get there, until you can make it real. I don't know, like, it's just, you don't want to give something empty to God. Like, I'll say it a bunch of times. I think it's really important. But I also really wanted to focus on personal worship, because, again, I think it's really easy to put praise and worship time to the Sunday morning as what happens before the sermon, and it can't just be that. Like, it can't be. It has to be personal and private, and I think you have to remember that personal worship is going to look different to each person. I remember when I was told first that I had to, like, about personal worship, I was like, I can't write songs. Like, this is not going to go well. My personal worship time is going to be like, God is amazing, and that was going to be it. Like, but personal worship time can be anything from art to just meditation. It can be anything from writing your own song to just reflecting on who God is. Like, it's just, what worship looks like to you just means that you are worshiping. And when you look again at what worship is, it means to humble oneself and to go before, as to kiss the hand of going before royalty and getting on your face and realizing who this is. And I'm going like all back and forth through my notes, but it's okay. And I think with all kinds of worship, you have to remember that it has nothing to do with you. It's not to make yourself feel better, even though a lot of times you end up feeling really great after worship. It's not about making you feel better. It's not about trying to come away with, like, you're not trying to fill yourself up then. God always fills you up, but that's not the point of worship. You go to him because you're in awe of who he is. If you are bored in worship, then you don't understand the subject matter. Like, it's looking at God and being in awe constantly. It says in Revelation that they sing, like, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, like, forever. Forever. They never get bored of it. And I love that. I love that you just, like, I was talking to one of my youth the other day, and they were saying how they used to get really bored in worship because, like, they didn't really get it. Like, why are we still singing? What is going on? Why are we talking about this guy still? I don't get it. But as they have fallen more in love with God, they've been saying, like, they can't get enough of it. They can't get enough because they know the man that we're talking about. They know this guy, and once you see who he is, you can't stop thanking him. The thanksgiving flows from you. It just becomes who you are. Like, it's worship is a lifestyle. Yeah. It's amazing. I can't get enough of it. Yeah. So, like, I really just want to encourage you in your private worship time, whatever that looks like for you, to just make sure it looks like something and that you are pursuing it, because a private worship time is so enriching, and it really just builds such an intimacy with God, and it builds such an incredible, again, you're walking right into the throne room. You're walking straight in, and God always meets you there because it's his room. Like, it's not going to be empty. You're joining in with heaven and the universe to come to and worship the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And in that, God always sees who you are and sees what you need. Like, I think it's a lot of times we get lost in prayer being like, okay, God, let me come to you. Yep, you're good. Here's what I need. But when you come to God and saying, look at who you are, and I praise you because of who you are, of what you've done, and look at the things that you've made, look at everything that you are. He always sees you in that and meets you there. And then you often find that he gives you the answers that you weren't even looking for yet. Like, God is so good to always meet you where you are. And but going back a little bit into corporate worship, I think when it comes to faith, it's really amazing because you're actually entering into a corporate faith journey. Like, you're all singing the same thing, but you're all in different places, but you're all like have a common goal. I always say that one of my favorite things about doing youth is that pretty much most of the time, everyone's going through the exact same thing. You all are like learning to figure out how you want to do acceptance, how you want to do friends, how you're trying to figure out this Christian walk thing. But every single one of them does it differently. And I feel like that's kind of where we are in praise, is that we all are here with a common goal, but we're all in a different place there, but God meets us all where we're at. And it's so beautiful. I just get really just carried away with how amazing God is to meet all of us exactly where we're at, even though we're all singing, "It is well." Some of us, it's very well, and some of us it is not, and we're just praying for the day where it is. But we're all joining in this incredible journey where we are all hoping and journeying towards the same thing. You pursue God as a group, and that's so empowering, and it's unbelievable to like see it happen. And when you know things that are going on in people's lives and in your own life, and seeing God then make it well or make it different, and he responds to your worship. He doesn't. Okay, I'm gonna go more into like the Bible because or else I'll just get excited. I'm gonna get excited either way. If you know me as a person, you won't be surprised. But I want to just quickly go over a very classic worship story, praise and worship story in 2 Chronicles 20, verses 1 to 27. It's a very long bit. I will mostly I'm gonna paraphrase. I hope that's okay, because Pastor Charlie's not all right with it, but that's okay. It's for God, not him. But it's about King Jehoshaphat. And basically what's going on is that there's King Jehoshaphat's chilling, and then they say, hey, there's this giant army who's come for you. They're coming to attack you. And obviously that's shocking and scary. I would go into a huge panic. Like, I knew that I was speaking here, and I was nervous for like hours before this, but like, imagine this is nothing that's gonna harm me. But this is something that's coming against him and his entire people. And he's in charge of it. And it's so amazing. One of my favorite verses is in verse 12, and he's saying, we are powerless against this horde that is coming against us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. And they all come before God, and they're fasting, they're praying, they're like, all right, God, like, this is not a good situation, but what do you want us to do? And basically God tells them, like, you're gonna put your worshipers first. You're gonna put the worshipers in front of everyone else, all the soldiers, everyone else. You're gonna put them up first. They're gonna go in praising. They're gonna go in with worship, and just watch, basically. And so then that's what they do. They follow God. They like do exactly what he says in faith. Again, that's like a very easy situation where you could panic even more, especially as the worshiper. I always kind of wonder how they felt in that situation, being put in the front line, in front of, they're defenseless, but they just have their faith, and they just know that God said, so therefore it will be okay. So they go up, and then it says that when they look toward, like in verse 24, it says that Judah came to the watchtower of the wilderness, and when they looked, behold, there were dead bodies lying on the ground, and none had escaped. So it ended up that the enemy ended up attacking themselves. They were defenseless. It like confused them. The worshipers went ahead and they attacked themselves, and they ended up, there was nobody left to fight. There is not a single person left for Israel to conquer because God had done it all for them. And that is so often what we find in our own praise and in our own worship, is that we go before in God in this humility and in this awe of who he is, and we end up without anything left to fight. And I love how that was a strange situation to praise. That's the weirdest time I could think of to praise. But when you look, but I think worshiping when you don't feel like it is the most powerful time to worship. And it's the most important time to worship, I would say. Which might be, I don't know, everyone might not agree, but I think so. Because when you look at David, he's known as the person after God's own heart. He was known as a mighty warrior of God, but also as a very intimate person with God. And you could see him in so many different Psalms, him saying things aren't okay, this is what's going on, but God, you are. And I love that about him, that he isn't blind to what's going on in his world. He isn't unaware or in denial of what's going on, but he is so much more aware of the greatness of God and the bigness of who he is in comparison to the smallness of his problems. And I think the more that we look at God, the more faith just automatically grows. Worship, I think, feeds faith, because it's hard to believe in someone you don't know. But the more you get to know him and the more you understand all that he is, all that he has done, and all that he does for his people, the more that you just trust him and you believe that he will do everything he says he will do. He'll turn things around. He will end up making the enemy attack themselves. You will end up as the head and not the tail, not because of anything that you do, but you just focus on him and you watch him do. And I think it's just so, 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 so important. It's a critical aspect to our Christian walk. Like we don't do it every week because it's like, gotta make sure the latecomers get there. Like it's not something that it's not an opening act, I think is one of the things that's my favorite thing. Worship is never an opening act. Worship isn't the thing you do so that you can then get to the rest of the stuff. No, worship is a critical part of your Christian walk. And it has nothing to, I can never say it enough, it has nothing to do with you, but everything to do with how good God is. Yeah. It has everything to do with looking at him and saying, wow, like it doesn't need to be glamorous, but in every bit of worship, it's always going to be glorious. I'm going to ask some questions because I'm going to get too excited and I won't stop talking, and then I'll forget that Pastor Stu and Matt are here. So what are your general thoughts so far on where we're at?
Really good. The verse that you mentioned at the beginning was from Psalm 23, where it says that that God is enthroned. Paraphrasing, it says, God is enthroned upon the praises of his people. And the incredible thing about worship, particularly corporate worship, is that it connects spirit with natural. It is the connector, and it's like a magnet that draws down heaven when it's worship. When that verse says that God is enthroned upon the praises of his people. If it's just words, if it's just shouts, then there's nothing there. But when it's praises of God's people, then God's kingdom is present, is manifested in that situation, regardless of the number of people that are there, whether it's one person. And it's as real for when it's just each of us on our own praising God. as it is when we're together on a Sunday morning, or at a house group, or a youth night, or we're out on the streets. You know, where when praises are lifted up, God's kingdom is manifested, and that's the power of worship, that it connects spirit with natural, which is who we are. We are spirit and natural, and so it is that kind of, it's releasing who we are into where we are.
And it just made me think of the verse. I wrote it down, but I forgot to say it. But in John 4:24, which is another one that I think people use a lot, but he's saying that God is looking for worshipers who will worship in spirit and in truth. And I love that that kind of brings both together. Like, this is the truth of what's going on or what is happening, but then you meet it up with the spirit. And it's, I think, such a beautiful, what's the word I'm looking for? A beautiful expression is that it comes together and it's just magnifies God even more in everything that he is. Yeah. Pastor Sue?
Yes, I was just going to mention that verse, and
Sorry.
no, that's okay. So it says God is spirit, and those who worship will worship in spirit and in truth. True worshippers worship in spirit and in truth. And I always explain it this way, that when I worship in spirit, it's not about my flesh taking the lead. It's about my heart taking the lead. And my flesh follows. You know, when I am truly worshipping God from my heart, my body will also be worshipping God. So that's worshipping in spirit. And truth is simply not with falsehood, not putting on an act, as you just said, not doing it in such a way that there's anything that is just kind of made up about it. But this is true worship from the heart, and that's where worship flows from, isn't it? It's from the heart. And David, in the field with the sheep, he learnt to worship in that place. He was neither in the valley nor in the wilderness nor on the mountaintop. He was simply in the field on his own, perhaps in a lonely place, but that's where he established worship as his lifestyle. And that then came into every part of his life. When he found himself in the valley with Goliath, he was a worshipper. And in all the different situations of his life. And you were also just saying about how it's really important that we have a right view of God, that our worship is simply a response from our heart to who God is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I love the sort of literal translation of that word worship being to kiss the hand, that bowing down, that just throwing ourselves at his feet in adoration. And that only can happen when we have a true view of who God is, that when we have a true view of his holiness, of his faithfulness, of his absolute solidity, that God is completely the rock on which we stand. He is totally faithful in every single way, and he is kind and he is generous. And so that's where true worship comes from in our lives. Do you want me to stop?
Yeah.
Because the other thing I was just thinking is, I wasn't sure if that look was, you can stop now.
I was just taking it in.
The other thing that I was thinking as well, though, is that we have to have a right view of God, but we also have to have a right view of ourselves. In other words, we have to understand how God sees us, because that affects the way that we approach him, doesn't it?
That's really good.
It says in Hebrews 4:16, which I just happened to be turned to, it says, "Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need." And we can only come boldly to the throne of grace when we understand that we have that right to come boldly. And that right isn't based on our performance, it's based on his amazing grace, isn't it? So we have to have a right view of God when it comes to our worship, but then also a right view of ourselves, that I can approach God's throne, which is like, wow, first of all. I can stand before the very throne of God, that place of absolute perfection and holiness and majesty and glory, because of his grace on my life that has cleansed me completely from all sin, from all unrighteousness. And I stand now before him completely right and accepted in his sight. And so, and I can come before him, but you know what that makes me want to do? It just makes me want to throw myself at his feet in gratefulness and thanks.
And I find that the more that you learn about who God is, the more you learn about who you are, because that's your original nature. Like, the more you discover about God, the more you're in his presence, the more things just line up and make sense, because God has designed you to be like him, to look exactly like him. And it is something where you can just stand in awe and gratitude, like you were saying, and just say thank you. But I love that you said that you have to understand who you are, because, otherwise you just feel like you're weirdly groveling. But maybe that was just me. But
Worship isn't groveling.
it's not you trying to like get into God's good favors,
Exactly.
but just realizing how amazing he is. Here's a question I thought would be interesting. What is one thing you wish the congregation would know before going into worship?
One thing. Okay.
I'll start with that.
You start.
That God is worth our worship more than the distractions in the room around us. When we gather together with God's people to worship, so I'm talking about congregational worship right now. When we gather with God's people, inevitably there will always be lots of distractions, and no one's immune to those distractions. But I believe that we can all do better with putting those distractions away from us, and not allowing those things to prevent us from coming before the throne of God. Because actually for us in Family Church Portsmouth, we stand in a sports hall that's either too cold or too hot.
Never in between.
And there can be lots and lots of distractions. And so we often see ourselves as standing in a very natural room with people and all these distractions, but actually we're not. We're standing before the throne of Jesus. And if we could just understand that and not allow the natural things around us to pull us away from his presence, then how incredibly dynamic our worship could be. And so, but we have to get that together. I can't just have that revelation, nor can Matt, and nor can you. We all have to have that revelation that let's make the most of this opportunity. Let's lay aside every distraction, every voice in our heads or around us that would try and prevent us, because the devil doesn't want us to worship. He knows the power of us coming before God and worshipping him. And so I think that for me, that would be the number one thing.
Yeah, I think pretty much similar to Stuart, is an understanding that we are responsible for how we worship. God isn't responsible for how we express our worship. He's looking for us to express our worship. Like the verse from John 4. He's looking for people who are going to worship him, but he's not responsible for how we worship. And if we understood how responsible we are and can be for our worship, then we would find ourselves worshipping more freely, regardless of whatever situation we are. What type of church. It doesn't matter what type of church you're at. The argument that John 4, where that you mentioned, Jesus is responding to the woman at the well, and she brings up this argument, where should we worship? Which is an argument that's been raging for the last 2,000 years within the church. Should we do it here? Should we do it there? Should we do it this way? Should we do it that way? Should we have instruments? Should we not have instruments? Should we have new songs? Should we have old hymns? It's, we still haven't got it right, the church collectively. We're still arguing over that. And Jesus cuts through that whole argument and says it doesn't matter where or how or who with, it's about your heart. And that word that both the woman and Jesus use for worship, proskuno, it like we said it before, it means to bow down. It's a reverence, and it's coming close to kiss. It's something that you, as a subject of a king or queen, would do before that king or queen to show reverence and just surrender, submission, not in fear, not out of a fear of if you don't do this, you're going to receive retribution, but out of adoration and trust that who you're surrendering to not only has your best interests at heart, but is faithful and trustworthy, and is worth what you are bringing to them, that act of worship that you are bringing to them. And it's that kind of, it's that heart attitude that we have if we understood and we took responsibility for that, each one of us, whether it's when we come into church on Sunday morning or when we're just getting up in the morning, it's that having that kneeling heart attitude, that whatever happens in whatever situation and in whatever way it gets worked out, that kneeling heart attitude affects and defines everything that we do. And our experience, certainly on a Sunday morning, will be defined by our choices.
Yeah.
Most of the time, people come into church and their experience of worship is defined by how they feel, by the experiences they've just walked out of from, getting ready for coming to church, and whatever that involves, the journey and all that, or whatever situations they're walking through at the time or are coming ahead. All of that's the stuff that defines most people's experience of worship. If we can accept responsibility for who we are as worshippers, and this is where faith comes into worship, that regardless of those situations, regardless of those circumstances, regardless of those feelings, you can choose to step into who God is and step into your revelation of God, whatever level of revelation that you might just know him as the person who saved you because you got saved last week, and that's all you know about God. But if you can step into that, you are taking responsibility for how you worship, and you will find that your worship experience becomes richer because it is flowing from your heart and is not defined by how you feel or your circumstances or by the tradition or style or method within which you find yourself as a worshipper.
One of the things I think that I really appreciate that we do is we encourage free worship, and we say sing your own song quite a few times and just make it more about a personal love letter to God and make it your own worship. And just while you're speaking, I was thinking of Paul and Silas, another very classic worship story. But I love that. I never thought about it, but when it says while they were in prison, while they were in chains, it didn't say that they prayed about what was going on and then they worshiped. They just worshiped because who God is overruled their situation. And I think if we went to God in our day-to-day and in our congregations, if we went to him not as man, this has been a tough week, he knows, but we also know him. And in knowing him, we can put that aside and just worship and just come before him in that sincerity and in that love, because worship it comes out of love. It comes through love. And I think just looking at them, the way that they did it is such an incredible story that this is the reason we talk about it so much, because there's so much to get from it. But they put aside their shopping list. They didn't even ask first. They just worshiped him and saw things break out.
And that's where faith in worship comes into play, because you can't see those things. And all you can see is what you see in front of you, what you feel. Faith then, to worship God, is a deliberate decision. And it's something where your heart and your soul and your body align with it, because your body has to come, you can say, I'm going to worship God and worship God freely, but your body can say something completely different. If we can grasp that we need to get our heart and our soul and our body all in line with that faith decision, then that's when the power of God is released through worship. It's easy. We have we come with so many excuses to limit how we express ourselves physically, as well as I'm just worshiping God in my heart. I hear that all the time. I was just worshiping God in my heart. That's great, but actually, God made us, a triune being, body, soul, and spirit. And so, worship, when Jesus refers to it, he says that to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. He's talking about the whole being, that love, that worship. It has to engage every part of who we are.
Yeah.
And that is a faith thing. Because I don't feel like it, or we feel tired, or, we respond to what we see in front of us. We respond to what we feel. Faith is the thing that takes us out of what we see into what we can't see, but we know is real.
Yeah.
And that's where worship takes place.
Yeah, and that's that faith thing then allows uninhibited worship. And David obviously is the great example of uninhibited worship, where he slung his cloak off and just went wild, spinning and dancing and praising before God, despite what other people thought of that. And actually, that can be a big thing for people. People don't want to sing out, or perhaps lift their hands, or clap their hands, or even dance before God, because what will people think of me? But what are we more interested in? Are we more interested in what people think of us, or what God thinks of
That's
us?
good.
And actually, I think God loves it when we decide that we're going to care more about what He thinks than what other people think.
There's this one verse that really sticks out to me in John, where there's like this group of people who say that they like really want to follow Jesus, they really want to go with what he's saying, but they wouldn't for fear of the Pharisees. And I think we see that a lot in worship, and there's a want behind it to engage, but for fear of the Pharisees, for fear of the people around you, you don't engage, because you don't want to be seen as that weirdo, as the guy who danced with all his might, because sometimes that wasn't necessarily flattering. But God notices, and how the one leper came back to thank Jesus, God notices and values and honors the person who comes back to say thank you with every bit of effort that it takes. But I have another question. This one isn't one of the ones I prepared, but is there any stories of any situations in your life where you've seen worship totally change your situation, or the situation of someone you've known, or anything like that?
Well, for me, it was through worship that I personally discovered the reality of God for myself. And so I, as a 10-year-old, I was saved. I accepted Jesus, and at that time, we went to these tent meetings in Romsey, and the church that we then became a part of had put these tent meetings on, and it was the first time I'd really ever tangibly felt the presence of God, and I felt God's presence because in those meetings. I saw around me everyone worshipping and really worshipping from their hearts, which I'd never really seen before. And so I thought, well, I'm going to do that too. And I began to sing and lift my hands and worship God from my heart. And almost instantaneously, the tangible presence of God filled my life, filled my body. And the only way that I can really describe that feeling is like, I have been electrocuted once, but like electricity. I was going to say I've never been. I have once. A bit stupid, but it's like electricity just going through my body, and you can't build your worship experience on feelings.
Yeah.
However, when you worship truly from your heart, I believe God wants to meet with you.
Yeah.
And the Word of God says that we draw close to God and God draws close to us. And so God's response is always to come in His presence into our lives. Jeff shared the verse on Sunday that the mountains melt like wax at the presence of the Lord. And that thought of the tough stuff that stands in front of us, as God's, my view of it was this, that God's over here, the tough stuff's there, and I'm here. Well, as God's presence comes towards me, because I make a decision to worship God, all the rubbish in front of me just melts away as His presence fills my life. And then later on, teenage years came and probably sort of became a bit dry in my walk with God. But again, at 16 years old, I remember looking around me thinking, I haven't got what everyone else has got, and I want it.
Yeah.
And personally, I said to myself, well, I'm going to sing these songs that we're singing, and I'm going to mean every word. I'm going to let the words come from my heart, because it's easy just to sing songs, isn't it? And I began to sing these songs and allow the words to come from me. They were my love songs to God, in response to his love for me. And again, as I made that decision, I just began to experience God's presence like never before, his reality, his greatness, his bigness, his love in my life. And that is what caused me to then become really passionate about his kingdom, about serving him, about the things of God in my life.
Yeah, I remember I was actually fairly similar because, like I said, I was raised around worship, went to a lot of worship practices as a kid, only to be a kid. I remember playing hide and seek with my other fellow worship kid friends while worship was happening, so I almost became numb to it because I was around it so much. But I remember at one point in worship being around one of my friends. I just watched her because I just remember thinking, she's so in love. And it absolutely baffled me because I'm like, we've all heard this song like a billion times. Like what makes it different? And I remember being very similar to being like, I'm gonna be intentional about listening to what the words are saying and realizing that it's about the same person. And it's like when you, like knowing that the Bible is a love letter makes it so much more personal, and then making the songs personal for your life makes it different, and you automatically feel that love cultivating, and you grow with this weird appreciation. For me, I felt this like crazy new appreciation and love for this God that I'd been singing along to, singing songs to my whole life without actually putting any emotion behind it. But the more that I actually first emotionally tuned in, then my spirit tuned in after, and it was really just amazing. Matt?
For me, it was when I was 17 years old, and I went on a family camp down in Cornwall that was actually being run by my aunt and uncle. But it was just like a Christian camp, so they had like teaching and worship in the evenings. And I'd grown up in the Baptist church, so I knew all about singing songs and hymns and that kind of thing. And so there was a small group that was leading the worship in the evenings. And so each evening we would be just singing songs. And then it was the kind of meeting where there were a lot of people, not all of them, but a lot of people were raising their hands. And that, for me then, that was quite a new experience. The church that we went to wasn't a church that raised their hands. And so we were kind of like, I was kind of looking around watching all these people raising their hands, and they seemed to be kind of enjoying it. Some of you might know I'm not a very, I'm quite a shy person. Some might have picked up on that. So to me, the thought of raising my hands, certainly at the start of the week, was like, that seems a bit showy to me. What's about? But as the week went on, I watched and I was interested, and it was on the last night, the Friday night, and they were singing "Shine Jesus Shine" by Graham Kendrick, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna have a go at this. I'm gonna raise my hand. So it was like, "Shine Jesus," and I was just down there. But like, as the song went through, my hand kind of got higher and higher up, and then there was a point where we were doing the chorus. I think it's after probably the third verse, and you know, the "Shine Jesus Shine" as a chorus is really anthemic. It's powerful. It's, you know, you sing it out, and it got to the point where I actually just suddenly my hand went up, and something inside me clicked, and suddenly it was like, this is what it is. That it suddenly it meant something to me. Suddenly all the words that we were singing meant something to me, and it changed my whole understanding of relationship with God. Just the actual physical act of raising my hand. There was nothing spiritual about it at all. It was literally, what is this? Why is everyone doing this? I'll have a go. And doing it, suddenly something clicked in me. And it changed the way I thought about God, and it changed my relationship with God. And that was so important because literally the next day I came home from camp and my whole world completely changed. My family fell apart. And everything that I was secure and I understood changed. But because of that experience and because of that change that happened in me, I was able to walk through it relatively unharmed. And it was because of that experience that suddenly I thought, I want to start learning to play guitar. And so I spent the summer learning to play the guitar, and the rest is history. Now I am where I am now because of my decision to have a go at raising my hands in a worship song. But it changed everything for me.
That's amazing. I love that, I've been listening to these different podcasts about, meditation and prayer and, what that looks like. And everything in our walk is learned. And I love that in all of our stories, it was kind of like, what's this? Why are people doing that? And then you decide to have a go. You decide to figure out what it's all about, figure out why. And in that, you find something, and from that you continue to pursue it more, and I love that. We are pretty much out of time, but do you have any quick final thoughts about what we've talked about today?
I would just say, particularly when you're going to church this Sunday, stop making excuses. Just do it.
That's a very good final thought. My final thought is, whether you're in the valley, in the wilderness, or on the mountaintop, in all of those situations, whether times are really tough or really great, let's make sure we're worshippers first and foremost. Even when things are going really well, it's easy to forget God in those situations and forget to worship. Let's make sure we're worshippers right through.
So I just want to encourage you, wherever you're at, remember that God is still God, and he is so, so worthy of everything we have to give him. And and that it does build and feed your faith in everything, to just remember that he is God and that he sees, and everything about him is fighting for you. So we're going to pray really quick, and Lord, I just thank you for who you are, and in this time that we just get to magnify you and focus on you. And I thank you for every person that's watching and listening, for just reminding them of the greatness of you, and in that, Lord, that you have how much you love them, God. So thank you for all of us, and just reminding us of who you are, who you've made us to be, and for just having your way with this week. In Jesus' name, amen. So thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.